Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Bruce Norris, and today our special guest is Craig Hill. Craig is the gentleman that you would be talking to if you were going to invest in trust deeds or if you were going to be borrowing money from the Norris Group. Craig,
thanks for having me.
Welcome to our show. Let's go back. How long have you been in hard money?
Probably about 28 years, I would say.
Okay. When you first started, who would have been the typical borrower of hard money?
Yeah, back then, I guess you would say, the typical borrower was probably somebody that was an owner occupant, meaning they lived in their home, they had a first trust deed, and either they were behind on their first or they had some other issue they had to solve, and they probably were looking to borrow like $10,000, $20,000 to help solve a problem. So most of the trust deeds at that time were probably, average of $20,000 to $40,000 seconds.
Okay. And at that time, prices were progressing pretty well. Was it common that you would be getting to do another loan for that same person and another loan? For that?
Yeah. Unfortunately, there were cases where somebody would borrow money. Personally, I would only do it twice, just because, if they can't solve it in two segments, there's just something inherently wrong. But yeah, there was definitely always equity to be pulled out.
But the entire business was really dealing with somebody that had equity and lived in the house.
100%.
Yeah. When you and I met, that was an interesting day for me, for sure, because
yes, both of us.
I was busy buying lots of houses and ran out of money.
Right.
And sat in front of you, and for the first time, you had an investor to deal with, and I remember it wasn't really an easy pill to swallow for the guy that owned the hard money loan business, thinking of loaning to an investor instead of an occupant.
Yeah, it was a challenge that shocked me. Just to give a quick example, just to tell maybe people what we're talking about. Bruce was buying maybe $100,000 houses in Moreno Valley, just to make the numbers simple, for like say $40,000.
Right.
And typically, a hard money company as ourselves, we would have lent up to $60,000 or $70,000 on that house. But it was hard for me to get the owner to lend Bruce what he paid for that house, which was, let's say, $40,000. So that was a long process to get that started, where the realization that house had as much value as the other house. The only difference was the house with the owner occupant had somebody that wasn't creditworthy, and this one had somebody that was absolutely creditworthy and somebody you should be lending money to. So it's funny how that's flip-flopped over the years.
Yeah, the investor world really didn't have access to that money. And I remember thinking that this is a great tool because at the time there were auctions.
Right.
And I was able to go there, and once we started doing business, I don't know if you remember this or not, but the first two loans I got, you did the appraisal, and I got more money than I paid for the property,
right.
So I actually got money back.
Right.
And I remember asking you, when you told me the amount I was going to get to borrow, I said, "You're loaning me more than I paid. Is that a problem?" You were
right.
like, "Oh, I don't know."
Right.
But because I sensed that, I remember writing a check for 6 months payments on each house.
Absolutely.
And I remember, of course I never talked to the owner of the business, but it would have dawned on me, wow, this is a different guy.
Yeah, and I don't know if but really that probably was the beginning of really almost, not that we single-handedly did it, but that eventually changed what hard money was.
Absolutely.
Because until we met, a house was worth what you paid for it.
Yeah.
That's what you heard. If somebody paid $40,000 for a house, that's what it was worth. Even though the one next door was worth $100,000, that one was only worth $40,000. So we kind of over time really changed that model.
What was interesting too is that you were now being able to go to a HUD auction, and you guys gave me $1 million credit letter.
Right.
Which was great, because I'd never had one of those, and I'm sitting there and I'd buy a house for $40,000, and they'd actually take a pen
right.
and they'd cross out the million and say, now you have $960,000.
Right.
I thought, wow, they just really believe this.
Yeah, exactly.
And what it also did for your business, instead of having to loan one loan to one troubled person and 2 years later maybe get a refi, that wasn't the model anymore.
No, it was, when you went to an auction, I couldn't wait for the next morning or whenever when the fax would come over on how many deals you bought.
Right, because I'd get a half a dozen deals, and I didn't have to worry about chasing money.
Right.
I've never understood trying to work all the angles to where I've got all the money directly and all that. Wow, I got paid really well by finding the next deal.
Right.
And I really didn't want to have to think about where the 40 grand was going to come from. I just accepted that as a cost of doing business. And it really wasn't a cost. It was an opportunity fee that if I didn't have access to it, I wouldn't have been able to even attend the HUD auctions. I always just really appreciated access to the money, you know?
Yeah, I mean, having that part of it solved is really amazing because it helps you leverage your whole business. I mean, is there a cost to somebody, a net cost, I should say, if on their own they can do 2 loans or 2 properties, 2 deals, and with leveraging money they can do 4 deals? I mean, at the end of that year, if they make more money, is that actually a cost using the money?
Right.
I mean, there is a cost to it, but overall, there's
Yeah.
a benefit.
Yeah, you just had to, and I ended up with the same issue that you had said in another segment we did one time, where now that I had access to almost unlimited money,
Right.
I found that I also had access to almost unlimited monthly payments.
Yes, yes.
And I finally had to rein myself in and say, just because you can buy it doesn't mean
Right.
you want it right now.
Exactly. And that's kind of one thing I've always used with clients. A lot of times they'll ask me, like, well, geez, how much can I borrow, or how many will you do?
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of always throw it back on them and I say, well, how many monthly payments can you afford?
Yeah.
Because that's where we should stop.
And that's the thing about dealing with investors, is that you sometimes can be a really good buyer and you haven't got the other processes down as well as you need to. I would certainly be in that category. I was not a contractor.
Right.
And I was not a salesperson.
Right.
And as far as exiting the house. So I could buy well, but then I was delegating a lot of the processes after that. And that was one of the things that was that I had to learn myself, is that, okay, I've got 20 hard money loans and I'm counting on 7 closings and only 2 happen.
Right.
And you just have to have reserves, and that's, ultimately that's where we've landed on when people borrow money from us, is that we just have to say, it's not going to go as easy as you think.
Yeah, it's just never the best case scenario. The best case scenario does exist, but not every time.
When we first started the loan business, that was really right at the end of that REO cycle.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, okay, well, who are we going to loan to after that?
Right.
After all those REOs go and there's no more auctions.
Right.
And, it was interesting that maybe it was part of the education of me as an investor, because I had to go somewhere else to find deals as far as other methods, but so did everyone else, and we were already in the loops, so to speak.
Right.
So we found that we were getting business without having to change the model, and that you had mentioned that. We didn't have to go to commercial or land or something.
Right.
We just had to deal with the same people that were now going to find properties a different way.
Yeah, that's always been why I think our model is successful. Our model has always been trying to create a program that's attractive enough to the most successful people in the business so that they'll always want to borrow your money, because as you mentioned, if it's not, say, REOs that they're buying, that means they're going to be sending out letters to homeowners. They're going to be doing something because that is their business. In other words, just because the REOs are gone, it doesn't mean that they're going to go get a job somewhere else. I mean, they're property buyers.
When I was, it was probably 90 when I was running an ad.
Right.
And so you had the same kind of market that you would have in, say, 1998 to 2002. I had lived through that at the late 80s, to where I was definitely buying properties directly from people or out of the MLS, and then all of a sudden, all the phone calls I got were from people that were over encumbered. And there was a transition to go from buying directly from people to buying from auctions and all that stuff, and that was a transition. And I think that's what happens with experience, is that you recognize the next phase in advance.
Right.
So, when the REO auctions and all that were done by, let's say, 96, it was already in my mind, okay, this is like that. This is the 80s
Right.
again.
Absolutely.
I know how to do that part.
Absolutely.
But for whatever reason, I remember thinking, I was surprised that the loan business was going to be busy with the same stuff, only from
Right.
bought from an owner. I didn't know if there was enough people that knew how to do that.
Yeah, I think it's amazing how many people, I've always been amazed how many people buy houses at a discount. I mean, it's always there.
One of the things that we ended up doing because we had access to money, this was a big deal for the company and for myself, is that when we bought 93 lots in Rosamond, we did 93 hard money construction loans.
Right.
That was a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it was necessary. I mean, didn't have 93 times whatever it was, 100
Yeah,
grand.
exactly.
So we needed to leverage that, but you know, the company learned how to do construction loans, and we learned how to do construction projects, and we taught other people to do the same thing. And I think that's actually perhaps one of the next phases for our company in the next few years, is we're going to see more construction projects because it's harder to find deals, but you can create them from scratch.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to necessarily find the deal because you can create the deal. And I think that's the difference. And we have done a fair amount of construction loans in the last 6 months.
When we got to the 2008, 2009, where we had these massive REOs at a price that was really amazing. I mean,
Right.
This was very different than the discount, it seemed like. The whole market was discounted. So it wasn't like you were getting 50% off of what it was worth. It was worth 60% less than it was.
Right.
And then your discount, whatever it was, it put it in a range where it cash flowed, but investors couldn't get money.
Right.
That was the big deal. Okay, so how do you get money? And we went to the trouble of going back to Washington D.C. and even getting an interview in front of Fannie Mae saying, will you loan us a pile of money instead of 4 loans? And the
Right.
answer was no. And so we were able to start a program at that 9.9% at the time, and that was a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, that was just, when we started that program, as you mentioned, probably in 2009 or so, it really didn't exist. I mean, there wasn't a hard money company out there that was really trying to attract people that were buying rentals. And when we came out with an 8-year term at 9.9%, it allowed so many people to keep so many rentals that were priced so well. And it's really great because you see the result of that now,
Yeah.
6 years later. A lot of people really made a lot in equity over those years.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting about that too is that there's lots of pieces to that. We picked an 8-year time frame at the time,
Right.
because of me studying cycles and saying we have a long ways to go before this is going to peter out.
Exactly.
But getting 9.9% investor money would have never happened without a track record that's trusted.
Right.
There's no way.
Right.
And so those are the elements that came together. We have a borrower that was able to come in and get a loan that would have never been able to happen without a lot of pieces of the puzzle having gone on before for a long period of time.
Yeah, if you create an environment of successful investments, it makes it much easier to change course with the people that you already have in-house, because they feel very comfortable with what you're recommending and why.
Yeah, and sometimes the market changes. That's the thing. What used to be the 12% turned into the 9%.
Right.
And we'll discuss that we're in an environment now where it's changed yet again, but it makes perfect sense. What was the track record of that 9.9% program? I think we funded in the tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, I think
of it.
the last time Aaron looked and showed it to me, I think we funded about maybe $50 million worth of those loans.
Okay.
And I think it was 3 or 4 notice of defaults that we had out of that entire $50 million, and not one REO.
Right, no
and
loss.
For people that don't know what an REO is, that means not one property went back to an investor and at the sale. And really that speaks with the quality of the buyers that we have and the borrowers. That's just really our hats off to them, because I mean, that's people doing a really good job on that side.
Absolutely. What are some of the misconceptions that borrowers have about hard money? Because there's a lot of TV shows now, and you get those phone calls,
Yeah, I think probably the biggest misconception that we might get is just they almost have this idea where they probably do get it from other people, but since it's hard money, they don't need any money of their own.
Right.
That's probably the most common call. So the worst thing you could probably do is, myself, if I'm lending somebody money, lend it to somebody that doesn't have any money of their own, because that's just a recipe for disaster. So I think that would be the number one, really probably 90% of the mistakes that people make with hard money is They don't need any money of their own.
Right.
And then a lot of other people maybe have misconceptions on that hard money is some kind of different animal. What I tell people is really hard money is exactly like Bank of America money. I mean, the paperwork, the process, everything is identical. So hard money is just a term. It's not a way of doing a loan.
You know, one thing I've written in an article is that hard money, you know, that term I've always had to struggle with because it did so much for me having access to it.
Right.
But the only thing hard about it is, to me, is that how hard it was to get that pile of money together for the guy that put it up for me. In other words, I respect the fact that somebody worked their butt off to give me a chance to do whatever I'm about to do.
Exactly.
And to pay them back and to pay them on time was a big priority to me, as I know it is for you.
Right.
And that's, you know, that's one of the things that I see our industry sometimes abuse, you know, where they have access to it now, and then all of a sudden they start getting trusted, and they do some things you just go, man, you can't do that.
Yeah, no, it's just you really always have to stay true to the process, because you want to make sure that, like, you end up with a secured note or deed of trust. And sometimes if you get a little too casual with that relationship, that can happen.
So when someone comes to talk to us about money, what are we looking for? What would prevent us from saying yes, I guess?
The number one thing that would keep us from saying yes to somebody would be, number one, if you're looking at the client, the fact that they don't have enough liquid cash of their own. So we look at a 30% rule. So if somebody wants to, say, borrow or be approved for $200,000, we would want to see about $60,000 available to work that project. Now, they're not going to have all that money into the project, but we need to know that it's there in case they need it for some other reason. So without a doubt, that's the number one reason. There's some, if somebody, these are obvious, but if somebody might be in bankruptcy or certain things that might affect the title of the property, then we couldn't deal with them. And then secondarily, really, we say no more than anything because they really haven't found a good deal. They may think they have a good deal, and they may want to do it because they're so anxious to do a deal, but when you start adding up the numbers and the cost and the likelihood of this and that, really they're probably going to go through the whole process not to make any money. So not having a good deal is probably the second reason that we say no.
Do you find that because of the outreach of education that sometimes we're getting called from an out-of-state investor, I mean the guy that's buying the property, and he's completely trusting a team of people that happen to be in our state to tell him what a good deal is? Yeah,
and I'll use this example because I think it'll sum it up. When we used to get those calls a lot, because there used to be a lot more from outside seminars and things, I used to always ask the people, they used to tell me, well, I'm going to buy it for this, it needs this much in repairs, and I'm going to sell it for $300,000. Mm-hmm. So I would ask them, well, how did you determine that it was worth $300,000? And one person actually told me, well, that's what the listing agent told me.
Right.
And I thought, boy, you're kidding. You know, somebody's making a decision based on just information that really should mean nothing to them. So, you know, people need to know certain things. They need to know how much a house is going to sell for, and they need to know how much it's going to take to fix it up. Because if you miss either one of those two, then you're really going down a bad path.
Yeah, and that's hard to do from a distance, right? I mean,
it's impossible relying on other people.
If you're in Texas calling up California saying, well, how much is it going to cost to fix? I mean, you have to have a team on the ground that you would trust, and you obviously don't have one yet.
Yeah, and the thing is, you're relying on people that are making commission or profit because of a yes answer from you, not a no answer.
The classic comment was, and I think you and I were both involved in this transaction, I ended up talking to the broker, and the comment was something like, well, we know we're not going to make any money on this one, but we're practicing.
Yeah, no,
wow.
That's not worth the practice.
No, not, well, of course, the broker is going to get paid.
Yeah,
on
the
practice,
broker is going
right?
to make money.
But yeah, well, we know that guy that's putting up the money is not going to get any practice.
Well, I would always suggest in a situation where it was tight, I would always, when a broker was involved, I said, well, why don't we put your commission at the back side? Mm-hmm. That way there's a little more in here, and then you guys can just deal with what's left. Yeah. That never went over too well with the brokers.
No, I can imagine.
They didn't like that one.
Every once in a while you'll tell me that this investor didn't find a deal, it found him.
Yeah.
What do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, it's not uncommon for that, I think, because sometimes I'll get a call from somebody and I do ask them if I can tell that it feels like it might be their first deal or they're relatively new at this. I always ask them, well, tell me how you found the deal. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they'll say something to this effect, well, it was listed, it's been listed for 6 months and this and that. And I just tell them, with all the investors that are out there looking at listings daily, a good deal is not going to last on the market that long.
Right.
So a lot of times what happens to people is they don't actually find their first deal, it finds them. And by that I mean there's something hidden in there. Maybe it's a foundation issue, maybe it's something they're probably not equipped to handle, but you really need to be careful about jumping in too quickly on a first deal like that.
I just heard of a story last night. This is a true story, won't use the names, but someone bought a single family, very rural area, 20 acres, that had no permits and had no electric meter, closed escrow, and it used to be a former chicken coop.
Oh, geez, yeah.
So, and the broker was certainly happy to get commission on the sale, but that's literally after the fact, worrying about why the meter wasn't there, and then you find out that there's nothing structurally correct on the property.
Right, and that's the wrong time to find out.
How do you feel about the flips of the flip of the flip? So you're dealing with the buyer, and all of a sudden you find out it didn't originate with him, it got flipped over to him, and then you find out there's another. At what point does that make you feel like you're the designated bag holder?
Yeah, that's why you're always looking at certain numbers for them. You always want to help a client with the initial numbers because we can analyze the deal and make sure that they're not paying too much. Getting a deal from a guy that flips properties, that might be a totally good deal. Mm-hmm. But most of the people that do the flips, they don't make a whole lot on every deal. But right. Sometimes you'll see a deal. Maybe our appraiser Rick Solis might even note it on the appraisal that it was just recently bought for a certain amount, and now 80 grand's been added onto that.
Right.
Well, when you start to see numbers like that, you really want to caution people that maybe there is this might not be something that there's any profit left in it for you.
We've now got to a point where we have this brand new program, just like before we had the 9.9% program. We now have
right.
a 6.9% program.
Yes.
So let's talk about that. It's a 3-year loan.
Yes.
And is this now? Right now we're using it for new purchases, correct?
Yeah, we're doing it for new purchases or refinances of properties.
Okay.
So not existing loans that we have, but new refinances. So new loans to us are all available for this loan.
Okay.
And it's a 3-year loan. It's, as you mentioned, it's 6.9%. There's a prepay for the first year. And what we tried to accomplish with this, we did a lot of research on what was available. And you were working, as you know, with somebody that wanted to kind of be involved with us so we could kind of compete in a way at a lower interest rate, because that's just where a lot of the markets were going with banks and hedge funds and things of that nature. And we came to the fact that we wanted to have a product that was ours.
Right.
Meaning this is just a hard money loan. There isn't anything tricky about this.
The application isn't 20 pages long with
this is
4 months process.
Exactly. This is just exactly what we do. And we've tried to find a niche for people that maybe they want to hold on to a property for a few years and then sell it. Whatever the case may be, I mean, this has just really found a little niche in the market that it just doesn't seem like anybody else is in right now.
Right. Well, it's the new exciting program, and we feel like we're going to fund tens of millions of dollars and have support from both sides again.
Yes.
Once, because we're trusted with the money, and we have a borrower that actually needs the interest rate for it all to make sense for them too.
Yeah, and by doing this program, we're able to lend to these really good borrowers that we've had throughout the history of the company.
Exactly. You can go to tngtrustdeeds.com for more information. And Craig, thanks for joining us today.
Okay, thanks, Bruce.
Great information.